Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. I apologize for the bit of a lengthy break I took from the podcast here over the last month. Frankly, there hasn't been that much to talk about, and there still isn't a ton of pressing, breaking stuff to talk about. After all, this is the slow time of year. These 3 months here, May, June, July, it's a little slow here in the college sports world, but we do have some things to talk about today. The first season has wrapped up of the new look Big Ten, the new look SEC, where those two leagues are supreme over the rest of college athletics. We're going to talk, especially from a Purdue and Big Ten standpoint, about how that looked this year here today. And we will also dive into the House settlement, which became official last Friday, what that means for Purdue, what that means for college sports. If you don't already, be sure to follow the show on Twitter, @BoilersBeyond. There is plenty to talk about throughout the summer. It's a little bit more bits and pieces, of course, but come join the conversation, and you can always send over stuff you want me to talk about on the show. You can do that there, or by emailing me, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com, and be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss an episode this summer. This was the first year where college sports changed in a dramatic, irreversible way, with the Big Ten adding the 4 West Coast schools, with the SEC taking Texas and Oklahoma, with the college football playoff expanding to 12 teams. So much happened last year, but mainly the Big Ten and SEC dissolving the Pac-12 and depowering the Big 12 changed college sports forever. And you see it now in absolutely everything. The SEC got Texas and Oklahoma first, and that was the first shot. But the Big Ten doing what it did, going out to the Pac-12, was just a seismic bomb that meant that college sports would never look the same. The Pac-12 had very little stability to begin with, and the rest of those brands could not function on their own. At the time, I didn't think that this was a particularly good thing for Purdue. From a competitive standpoint, this was not going to be a particularly good thing for Purdue. And I said this at the time. From 2016 to 2023, Purdue's athletic department made tremendous strides to become more competitive across the board at the Big Ten level. You saw football really make growth. It was the laughingstock of the Big Ten in 2016 and 2015. It became competitive under Jeff Brom, thanks a lot to investment that Purdue made. Purdue basketball has become one of, if not the most consistent program in the conference over the past decade, and has had some really nice success there. Volleyball has maintained a very nice level of success. I thought Purdue had really done a nice job of modernizing its athletic department and coming into a new era, but it felt like once Purdue started to catch up, bang, this happens. You add these other schools, you really destabilize what you had. I thought that was going to be a negative for Purdue. And while it's far too early to make sweeping, definitive conclusions, we'll talk a little bit about what we experienced in year one. And I think the biggest shift, of course, came in football. Because in football, all of the power has been consolidated into 2 conferences. There is no power, there is no leverage held by any other conference at this point. You look at across the college football landscape right now, what programs outside of the Big Ten and SEC are capable of winning a national championship? Florida State, Miami, Clemson, Notre Dame. Those are the only 4 that I really think there's a strong argument for right now. The power exclusively lies in the SEC and Big Ten. And you can see it right now in the conversation that is ever present about the college football playoff and what possible expansion is going to look like, what a new format is going to look like after this 2026 contract ends. These two conferences hold all of the power in the sport that holds all of the power in college athletics, and they're not going to back down from exerting their power. They are going to make sure that whatever the playoff looks like starting in 2027 has as much of an advantage for the Big Ten and SEC as possible. And this is important because all of this is driven by the TV networks, who are the same ones who drove the Big Ten and SEC to do this and to grow their leagues. As always, the almighty dollar wins out. And you see it in the college football playoff expansion. You see it in the NCAA basketball tournament expansion. It's coming, guys. I don't like it any more than anyone else. I don't like the college football playoff. I'd go back to the BCS in a heartbeat. But this is all about the money. And this is why we are where we're at. I think the Big Ten going to 18 in football was just really rough for Purdue. This happened at the worst possible time because even before, Purdue was towards the bottom of the totem pole of the competitive landscape in the Big Ten. The Big Ten is a little unique because it is a very, very top-heavy conference for a really, really long time now. Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State have carried the water for this league nationally. Now, you add Oregon into that mix, and maybe Southern Cal. We'll see. USC has done it in the past, has operated at that level in the past. It's just been 20 years now. We'll see what Southern Cal does here with Lincoln Riley entering year 4 now. Time flies. But this is a really top-heavy conference where you have a very defined top tier. You have a pretty defined second tier that's a little more fluid now. But, you had your Iowas, your Wisconsins, your Michigan States that for a long time were really solid programs. Michigan State made the playoff. Wisconsin was close to making the playoff. Iowa was close to making the playoff. Everyone's fighting to be in that next mix. And you add in Washington and UCLA as two programs that historically are stronger than Purdue. It doesn't help matters. This came at a time where NIL was being thrown into the mix, and Purdue did not seem to be super well prepared for that in football. I don't know, we've got more to talk about this in the house settlement conversation later, but I don't know that Purdue football was particularly proactive on the NIL front. You combine that with what obviously just did not work out as a coaching hire in Ryan Walters, and Purdue goes 5-19 over the last 2 years. Purdue was clearly the worst team in the Big Ten last season. And it wasn't far off in 2023. But Purdue is not the worst football program in the Big Ten. It just isn't. It has a ways to go to become competitive in this landscape. What competitiveness is probably gets redefined here. This conference is a bear. In some years, your schedule is going to be worse than others. This is a big thing now. You are not going to have equal scheduling. You're not going to have a balanced scheduling type of deal in the Big Ten now. I just don't know how that happens. There's always going to be the gap of what, I know it's the example everyone uses, and I don't like referencing Indiana because it comes across the wrong way, but Indiana had a very light schedule last year. Purdue played Ohio State, Purdue played Penn State, Purdue played Oregon, 3 college football playoff teams. That's just going to be the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. There's not much you can do about that. I don't know that the travel is a big deal. Purdue got a nice gift from the Big Ten last year when it didn't have to go out west, since it already played a non-conference game out west against Oregon State. Didn't matter, and I don't think the travel had anything to do with Purdue coming home and just laying flat against Nebraska the following week. But that's something to, it doesn't help. And you look at this coming season, Purdue gets the scheduling dynamics just the worst possible way there. Purdue will go to Washington in its seventh game of the season, its seventh game in 7 weeks. 7 straight weeks with a game. You close that stretch with Washington, and it comes back-to-back against Michigan and Ohio State. That is brutal. You play what could be the 2 best teams in the Big Ten this year, or at least 2 of the top 4, probably for sure, and you get to do that as your 5th and 6th game in a row, and your reward for getting through that, you get to go fly to Seattle in November. That is brutal. And I think with what you see in the Big Ten schedule at this point, it continues to emphasize the conversation about what to do with non-conference scheduling. For those of you that have been listening to this program for some time, you know exactly how I feel about non-conference scheduling. Purdue has not had an unbeaten non-conference slate since 2007. If you can schedule wins, you have to schedule wins. Sure, you may get made fun of a little bit if you schedule a super light non-conference schedule. If you schedule an FCS and a couple of MAC Conference USA type of opponents. But if you're 3-0, who cares? You're not trying to make the college football playoff right now. You're not trying to put together some resume that's going to dazzle a selection committee. You're trying to build momentum. You're trying to make a bowl game. And it does Purdue no favors that these schedules are made out so far in advance. I mean, Purdue has this Ole Miss series on in the 2030s that's been on there for like 5 years. Why do we have to schedule this so far out in advance? It's never made sense, but I know there's been talk that the Big Ten and the SEC may require its teams to play a power conference opponent in the non-con. Great. If that requirement comes out, do it. Get it done. But if not, there is no reason to put yourself in a tougher position than you're already in, because this is a really difficult position. The Notre Dame series is what it is. It means a lot to some people. It's meaningless to others. I'm one of those who views it as semi-meaningful. I mean, I grew up an hour away from the Golden Dome as a Purdue fan when those two played every year. I grew up hating Notre Dame. But I can also recognize that since 2004, this series has been beyond one-sided, and you had the better part of a decade in there where it wasn't played. I don't know that it brings the exposure and cachet that it used to. Playing Notre Dame used to be a big deal when Notre Dame was one of the only teams that was going to be on national TV every Saturday. But now, every game's on national TV every Saturday. You can live in California, or I guess that's Big Ten country now. You can live in Maine and get the Big Ten network. You can live in Florida and get the Big Ten network. No problem. This isn't hard to do. I can watch every SEC, every Big 12 game from my couch here in Indianapolis. Easy. The exposure that you used to get from something like that just doesn't exist anymore. There are some positives, though. Even though your schedule is brutal, and even though it hurts you competitively in terms of how you stack up in the league. With this comes revenue sharing, and we're going to get to that coming up here, but this should help Purdue, because being in the Big Ten, and of course, the money that comes with it, should give Purdue a competitive advantage when it comes to recruiting against teams in the Big 12 and the ACC. Those conferences and those schools are probably going to have some difficulty getting to that $20.5 million to share. That's not going to be a problem for Purdue. It should be a positive playing in the Big Ten. Purdue's always believed that to be a selling point. The Big Ten and SEC are clearly a cut above everyone else now. Look at the NFL draft numbers from this past year. I hate referencing that as the be-all, end-all, but 26 of the 32 first-round picks came from those two leagues. That's not a coincidence. That's very telling. That tells you exactly where the sport is at. No matter which format gets selected for the college football playoff, the Big Ten is going to be a winner in this. And, it's big if you do put together that historic type of season where just everything comes together beautifully and you can get to play in that type of event. You'd probably get a chance at that point. That's a double-edged sword because everything outside of the playoff has been completely demolished and devalued. Quick, what was your favorite bowl game from last season? Do you even remember one outside of the playoffs? This all started back when the college football playoff came into existence and ESPN elected to act like the college football playoff was the only thing that mattered with its who's in phrasing and terminology. But it's only gotten worse since then. Bowl opt-outs weren't a thing before the college football playoff came into existence. But for a program like Purdue that will view reaching a bowl game as a major success, this is a bummer. But the landscape has changed. This is a really big era for Purdue under Barry Odom coming up. Purdue had to get this hire right. So far, all indications are positive, and we're going to start seeing what it looks like here this fall. This episode is brought to you by me. Yes, me. When I'm not watching sports, or more accurately, talking about them, I'm talking insurance with the people of Indiana. As an agent with Indiana Farm Bureau Insurance, I want to help you protect what you've worked hard to achieve. From home and auto to life and business insurance, I'm here to help you. Give me a call at 317-846-5861 or email me at jordan.jones@infarmbureau.com, and let's protect you from life's everyday risks. On the basketball side, I don't think it changed the league competitively as much. You saw it this past year. USC and Washington were woefully ill-prepared to join the Big Ten. And they've made moves in the transfer portal ahead of this year that may indicate that they are a little bit more ready to compete in the Big Ten. UCLA has a proud history, but it's not operated like a big-time program in quite a while. Oregon is solid, and it had a nice season, but it's not a huge needle mover. This conference is still controlled by the same programs, that it has been. The ones in the middle of the Big Ten footprint. And I know USC, UCLA, Oregon, even Washington, all supposed to have pretty good teams this year. But I'll believe it when I see it. These teams are at a major disadvantage with all of the travel. And the travel was a big storyline that got people really riled up last year. Look, it is a storyline. The Big Ten, the Midwest and East Coast teams only have to go west once. And it's a big deal. You saw Purdue and Michigan lose to Ohio State and Minnesota, both home games, right after coming back. Illinois lost at home to USC after coming back. Michigan State got swept out there by the LA schools. But the West Coast schools come east 4 times. They're probably coming east at some point during the non-conference too. Boy, that's rough. I mean, it's a long season, and that just makes it longer. Those schools have a major competitive disadvantage in this new landscape. The balance of power hasn't changed. It's made it really, really difficult to evaluate this league, though. I mean, you want to talk about a scheduling imbalance. When you only play 3 teams twice, and you get 7 teams just at home, 7 teams just on the road, you can look at really, really disparate strengths of schedules, really disparate lineups on what teams have to go through. It makes it really difficult to evaluate. The difference between basketball and football, though, is that other conferences remain powerful in basketball. The Big East is strong. The Big 12 is very, very good. The ACC has Duke, and it has some programs that should be competitive that haven't been lately. But this is interesting. And the stat that really did it for me this year is that there were only 4 conferences represented in the Sweet 16 this year. But if you take those same schools, the 16 schools that were in the Sweet 16 just a year ago would have represented 7 conferences. And that is where you see the difference. These conferences of, Houston used to be in the American. Well, now it's in the Big 12. And I know it has been for a couple years, but that's a big difference. That's a really big difference. BYU used to be in the West Coast Conference, used to be in the Mountain West too. Now it's in the Big 12. Consolidation. That's what makes this really, really tricky. It looks a lot different than it used to. It's kind of destroyed mid-major basketball. The transfer portal, NIL, just everything that's happened in the last 5 years has made this really difficult. The financial disparity is so big that, man, I don't know how these schools compete. You look at High Point. Purdue played High Point in the first round of the NCAA tournament, and High Point had a really nice season for a mid-major. It won its conference. It gave Purdue a really nice game in the round of 64. Its whole team's gone to the portal, basically. What do? You can't compete financially. It's a really interesting world in basketball. You're seeing the money aspect with NCAA tournament expansion. Outside of Seth Davis, who is just kind of an NCAA mouthpiece, who wants, and I guess I should point out, Seth Davis works for CBS, who has exclusive rights to the NCAA tournament. Who wants the tournament to be expanded? There's no faction of the college sports fan base that wants the NCAA tournament to be expanded, but it's probably going to happen anyways because it's good for TV and there's more money to be made from it. Okay. And for the big, the power conferences, they can make more money too. And it's better for coaches' stability, yada, yada. Yay. I don't spend a ton of time on other sports on this podcast, and I get asked about this sometimes. I don't have the bandwidth to pay close attention to sports outside of football and men's basketball, and it would not be fair for me to come on here and try to speak credibly about those programs if I'm not giving them the attention they would need to be spoken about credibly. But I can at least kind of keep an eye on what happens at the conference level, and women's basketball and baseball. The Big Ten has a pretty nice history in women's basketball. Purdue remains the only team to have won a national championship as a Big Ten member in women's basketball, but it's a league that cares about it. And USC and UCLA just utterly dominated that conference this year. In baseball, Oregon and UCLA both host a regional. And this weekend, UCLA will play in the College World Series. The Big Ten has had a few teams make runs in college baseball in recent years, but you're seeing that landscape shift. Certainly in softball as well. It's a very different competitive landscape around these other sports. And, it obviously will always beg the question, why on earth do these teams need to travel so much? And I'm curious to see, as we pivot into the House settlement, what it looks like moving forward now that athletic departments will be sharing revenue with the athletes. The inevitable took place last Friday when Judge Claudia Wilkin approved the House settlement. If it didn't get approved, this would have been nutso world because schools were promising this money. Schools were ready to hand this money out. This would not have been able to work. But it felt inevitable. If you're just catching up here, this gives athletic departments the ability to share up to $20.5 million of revenue per year with the student athletes. It's largely expected that for most power conference schools that opt into the full settlement here, about $15 million a year or so will go towards football, $4 million or so will go to men's basketball, and the rest will go to other sports. And at Purdue, that'll probably be women's basketball and volleyball. The part that feels the most questionable about this is that all external NIL deals now are supposed to go through some clearinghouse that the NCAA is setting up with Deloitte. And it's supposed to reject deals that are essentially just pay for play, these collective deals that aren't really paying athletes for anything. I have no idea how that's going to work, because fair market value is just whatever someone is willing to pay. And if someone's willing to pay market value, then how do you determine that it's unacceptable? This feels like a litany of lawsuits inbound against the NCAA, which is all we've been having lately anyways. But in the meantime, I think this is a good thing for Purdue. I do. This is not a perfect solution. This is, again, likely to create more lawsuits, but this gives Purdue a huge chunk of change to work with. We don't really know how much Purdue had before this. By all accounts, Purdue had plenty to succeed in basketball. Outside of the Nigel Pack situation that was just all sorts of weird, it never came across that Purdue had any issues in basketball, funding a competitive program. But in football, it was pretty clear that Purdue was playing from behind in trying to fund this program. That should change here. And yes, every other Big Ten school gets access to the $20.5 million too. So it's not like Purdue is swimming in cash compared to everyone else in the league, but it does look like Purdue will be on a much more even playing field. And then maybe you get some of the classic recruiting things that come back into the mix rather than just money. I think this is a good thing for college athletics. I am of the personal belief that these athletes deserve a chunk of what's coming in. Especially in football and men's basketball, the amount of revenue that these athletic departments are making off of football in particular, there's really, I struggle to justify not sharing anything with the athletes here. That it has been deemed unconstitutional. I don't know what to tell you. I don't think this is perfect, though. This whole NIL limitation thing, I have my doubts. This feels like a nice pause before the players, unionize and become employees. I don't know how that's exactly going to work, but I feel like that's the inevitable next step. But for now, I'm curious to see what this does overall, what the unintended consequences are, because there have been lots of those in everything. But as I said, I think this is a good thing, and I'm fascinated to see here in football, in recruiting and in the transfer portal, how exactly this works out. And starting July 1st, I'll be fascinated to keep an eye on anything with these deals being tracked by Deloitte. So that's all I've got for today, guys. I've got a couple of fun episodes I want to do here coming up, looking at the last 25 years, the first quarter of this century, for Purdue football, for Purdue men's basketball. So stay tuned for that. Send over questions. Do it on Twitter, @BoilersBeyond. Email me, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. Until next time, guys, take care.